Hello, and welcome to my talk on opening the gate to urban repair, a tool for citizen-led design. This is joint work between myself and Barath Raghavan from the University of Southern California. So our project is largely motivated by large-scale global challenges. We can think of something like climate change, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic impacting us all, and the fact that we're not physically together. And so we're faced with these global challenges today more than ever, but at the same time, these massively global challenges require us to rely on our local communities. So for instance, in the winter of 2021, there was large-scale snowstorms, unprecedented cold in Texas, in the US, and neighbors had to rely on each other to share supplies or shelter together when infrastructure couldn't keep them safe. At the same time with COVID, even though it's a global pandemic, we're really reliant on those locally in our communities to take precautions like wearing masks and getting vaccinated to help us all stay healthy. And so our work is particularly strongly motivated by the work of sociologist Eric Kleinenberg and his book, Palaces for the People. And he defines social infrastructure as the physical places and organizations that shape the way people interact. These are the places where people come together in a community and build the ties that allow for resilience later on. So these could be things like community parks, public libraries, schools, cafes, places of worship. And we were also inspired by the democratization of knowledge production in citizen science, because our goal is to democratize the design and creation of public spaces. So when citizen science first started, citizens were more like sensors. So for instance, in Galaxy Zoo, citizens are classifying data, but they're not doing any of the underlying data collection, and they're not doing the end processing where the new knowledge is produced. We contrast this with things like the DIY bio movement, where citizens or regular ordinary people are the primary investigators. So one example is this project here, the Oakland Insulin Project, in which people are hacking the insulin productions and trying to make it more open source, accessible, and affordable for everyone. So with Pattern Painter, and particularly the paper, our contributions are as follows. First, again, we compare this democratization of citizen science to grassroots urban repair movements, and we look at how they are both similar and different. Then we prototype Pattern Painter, which I'll discuss later in this presentation. And finally, we demonstrate its efficacy through a series of Mechanical Turk experiments. So first, the design of Pattern Painter. You can see a screenshot of a design produced from Pattern Painter here on this slide. So Pattern Painter was designed using the Unity game engine, using free and open source models for all of the elements, and then exported to WebGL. And the scenario for the Pattern Painter prototype is to help people create designs in 3D for vitalizing an empty lot in their communities. So using keyboard controls, folks were able to manipulate elements seen here, like the benches, the fence, the picnic table, and add them to a lot in order to create a space for the community. And then we hosted it on AWS as part of our evaluation. So as I talk about the evaluation, I have to note that due to COVID-19 issues, we had to test our prototype on Amazon Mechanical Turk because it wasn't feasible at the time when we were working on the testing in 2020, summer of 2020, to arrange for a field test. So we started with 12 scenarios for different kinds of public uses for public space, which were inspired by the urban planning literature, and in particular, the book, A Pattern Language. Examples of these scenarios, which can be seen in the small gray box at the top of the screenshot, include things like the community would like to use this lot as an outdoor theater. The community wants a space where elderly residents can gather for leisure activities. Or the community would like to see this area transformed into a space for a local farmer's market. Each participant was given 4 of the 12 scenarios to replicate, as well as a practice scenario to ensure they were familiar with keyboard controls and to control for attention. So again, we broke the 12 scenarios into 3 sets. participants got 4, so one of the 3 sets, and each set had 28 participants. So for each of the 12 scenarios, we came out with 28 different designs. In the second part of our evaluation, we asked different participants to evaluate the designs by both rating their characteristics and describing what they thought the purpose of the design was. So each design received 5 ratings across the 8 metrics seen on this table, and these were metrics that we pulled from the planning literature to capture various aspects of what we felt a good public space should be. So we expected that certain scenarios would rate higher on certain metrics. So for example, a community theater should rate high on entertainment, but maybe not something like access to nature. And we rated each one out of 7 on the Likert scale and averaged them. And then we also mined their text descriptions to see if people really were able to match what the design was intended for, and the scenarios of the design and the intention. And the results, again, as I share these, we recognize that this was not an ideal test scenario. And we hope that in the future, we'll be able to take the prototype and test it in a real world scenario, but this is what we had to work with at the time. We found that participants could successfully recover the scenarios from the designs, particularly those that had more specific or recognizable elements, like the playground scene here. So it was easy to recognize that this was the design of a space for children, whereas the designs of spaces for things like the elderly recreation weren't as easy to recognize because there wasn't specific infrastructure that said, this is a space for the elderly. However, most of the scenarios had high sociability ratings. And we felt this was really important because the goal overall is to create social spaces in communities where people can come together. And so while participants maybe didn't specifically get the exact scenario, we thought it was good that they were still sensing that this was a social space. And finally, one interesting thing we found was that depending on the juxtaposition of different elements, certain elements were able to be used as different things. So in this scenario with the playground, these little beds off to the left side, where you can see the brown and the beds, were actually seen as sandboxes instead of garden beds, which they were intended to be. And so this was exciting for us because we really want to make this as reusable as possible and as flexible a system as possible. And so we felt that this made the tool fairly flexible. And so overall, again, we felt that the evaluation we were able to do proved usability of the system, but we do hope in the future to test with community organizations because we know that will bring other challenges. So thank you for the presentation. And here is some updated contact information for myself if anyone would like to discuss the work further.